Good morning, respectively, good afternoon to those joining us from Japan. Thanks a lot for being here in our webcast today. The importance of customs and customs matters is more and more increasing. We will today talk about EU customs regulations and about navigating the complexity of international trade. Please kindly note that this webcast will be recorded, but no personal data will be stored. The record, as well as the slides, will be shared afterwards. Should there be any questions from your side, you can share these via the Q&A function, or of course, please also feel free to reach out to us afterwards. The webcast is bilingual, and each section in English language will be followed by a summary in Japanese language. Let us briefly introduce ourselves. My name is Iris Mönnich, and I'm an international tax partner with Deloitte based in Düsseldorf, and I am leading our Deloitte Japanese Services Group for Tax. Also here with me today is Asagi from my team. And Asagi, please kindly introduce yourself.
本日はお忙しいところご参加いただきありがとうございます。My name is Asagi Hino. I am a senior manager in Business Tax International Tax Team and part of Japanese Services Group. Thank you also from my side for joining our webcast today. I will now hand over to Marcos.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Markus Wipfler. I am a partner at Global Trade Advisory in the Frankfurt office in the Deloitte German practice for Global Trade Advisory. And I'm happy to give you an overview of the customs regulations in the EU. Importers have to follow, and thanks to Asagi and Iris for hosting this webcast. Having a quick look on the agenda we have prepared for you today, we will start with the current challenges in global trade. Importers and legal entities are focusing on. We will show the centralized customs clearance at import as a possibility to smoothen and simplify an import procedure in the European Union. And we will close with an outlook of the upcoming or already ongoing EU customs reform of the Union Customs Code. So, on the next slide, it's displayed the current challenges in global trade companies are facing nowadays. In the recent years, we have increasingly observed a transformation of the customs function within the company. It's not longer just about the mere processing of imports and exports of a company. The customs function is a field in tension with many external factors to consider that affect customs clearance, but have little to do with the actual customs procedure of import or export. In this picture, you see the customs function in the middle, and the outside are different threats and developments that have a massive impact on the customs function. In general, importing products into Germany and companies doing so must follow more than 370 legal provisions, depending on the product nature, more or less than that number, of course, or less. Not all 370 legal provisions are applicable for all products, but they are also covering a broad scope of EU policies, such as economy and finance. For instance, the customs tariff, quotas, excise duties on alcoholic products, tobacco or energy products, the single market and sustainability aspects, such as markings, phytosanitary regulations, REACH regulation for chemical products, or deforestation. Moreover, security aspects for instance, drug precursors or explosives have to be obeyed. Product safety and also consumer protection are to be strengthened, and environmental aspects for sustainability, for instance, are also gaining much more importance. An example in this regard is as you can see here on the right-hand side, the EU Supply Chain Directive, also known as CSDDD, as well as the EU Deforestation Regulation or the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM, which is taxing the CO2 emissions in the country of production at the time of importation of the products into the EU. So companies, and in particular the customs function of the companies, have to be aware of all these regulations and the resulting impact on trade. On the next slide, we will make an example or see an example of one of these complexities. So the customs tariff number, as stated in the middle of the slide. The roles and the responsibilities of the customs and trade-related tasks should be clearly defined within the company. So we look here as an example, as I said, to the customs tariff number and the importance of the customs tariff number. But why is it important? The customs tariff number is one of the three elements of taxation at import. The other elements of taxation are the customs value, we will see in the next slide, and the country of origin of the imported products. So the determination of the correct applicable customs tariff number has an impact on the correct handling and treatment with regard to the customs duty rate, with regards to the applicable VAT, value-added tax rates at import and also on domestic supplies and sales. It regulates required import licenses, export control regulations, excise taxes for alcohol, energy products or tobacco, for instance, EU statistical reporting and country of origin rules, because the rules or the regulations always refer to the customs tariff number or the HS codes, which are then defined as products subject to the legislation. An instrument to gain the legal security about the classification is to apply for a binding tariff information at the customs authorities. The result is binding for both the customs authorities and also the applying company. So let's close the slide with two questions you can answer yourself later on. Who is responsible for the determination of the customs tariff numbers for the products you import in your organization? And are you aware of the impact of a wrong classification? On this slide, you see the second element of taxation at import. That's the customs value. It seems normally to be very easy to determine the customs value for import. But is this really the case? This picture shows some examples of prices and price elements which might be relevant for customs purposes. So which costs are relevant for customs valuation when the import declaration is lodged? Which invoice can be used for the customs valuation? Is it invoice 1, invoice 2, or invoice 3? So a lot of questions have to be answered. There are certain customs value relevant price components that need to be considered if they are not included in the price actually paid or payable. These often are payments for trademarks and copyrights in the form of royalties, or also provisions by the buyer in the form of tools, sketches, and production materials, which are supplied with no cost or no cost level to the producer of the products, which are later on imported into the European Union. So in case of intercompany transactions, further topics have to be clarified. Which price elements are included in the intercompany prices? Has this been considered in a transfer pricing documentation? And does the TP documentation foresee retroactive price adjustments, which then afterwards have an impact on the declared customs value, where you can either apply for refund of customs duties, which are overpaid, or you have to declare because of legal requirements when the customs value increased and you have to pay additional customs duties afterwards. So, since the foreign trade or the customs function within the company is not often directly in communication with the tax department or the finance area, such aspects initially remain under the radar, let's say, until a customs audit takes place and explicit questions are asked, such as whether licenses are being paid. So for the legal assessments, questions need to be clarified. Is it a payment according to the terms of the purchase transaction? Does the payment of a royalty fee for the goods is being valued? Can the goods be acquired by the importer without the payment of the royalty? Referring back to the shown picture, an answer can't be given. What is the correct customs value at importation? Because we need to know the agreed Incoterm, so the international commercial term, in the contract, since by definition, the Incoterms already consider different price elements. As an example, an ex-works price does not include transport costs to the destination, whereas DAP, delivered at place, does consider these costs. Asagi will give you now a short summary in Japanese language.
Thank you, Marcos. それではこれまでのところについて簡単に日本語で説明させていただきます。今日我々はグローバルなものの流通なしには考えられない社会に生きています。ある程度安定した物流が確保されてはおり、物の動きの追跡の可能性は高まっているとは言えます。しかしながら、グローバルな物流における複雑さは継続しており、企業の中における物流や関税に関する機能の重要性はさらに高まっています。例えば EU に物を輸入する企業は370以上のルールに直面することとなります。それは国境関税、輸入割当、物品税や植物検疫、化学物質に関するリーチと言われる規制、森林破壊、持続可能性に関するものや安全保障に関するルールを含みます。例えば、多くの企業が近年取り組んできた CBAM や EUDR もこの一例です。もちろん370以上のルールが一律に全ての企業に適用されるわけではなく、適用ルールやそれによるサプライチェーンにおける影響は、業界や物流をどのように運用していくかによって異なってきます。関税コストがどれくらいなのかということを知るために、企業内での透明性を確保し、物流に関するタスクにおける責任や役割を明確化することが推奨されます。関税において特に重要となってくる3つの要素は、関税の分類、関税額に関する評価、原産国となりますが、これらの情報を正確に入手し、判断し、ルールを適用することは非常に重要となり、輸入する企業の関税コストに大きな影響を与えます。関税コストの負担を最小限に抑えるためには、簡素化や特別な適用されうるルールを常にアップデートする必要があると考えます。以上で日本語のサマリーは終わります。Now I will hand over back to Marcos.
Sagi. So we're coming directly to the second section of our webcast about the centralized customs clearance at import in the European Union. The centralized customs clearance, so at import, CCI, is a relatively new procedure according to the Union Customs Code. It allows to submit the import declaration centrally in one EU member state, regardless of whether the third country goods are physically shipped to another EU member state. So the involved authorities are the supervising customs office at the place where the importer is established and the presentation customs office where the goods arrive and are presented for customs checks. So how does it work in practice? The basic procedure has or foresees different steps or several steps. In the first step, the importer lodges a customs declaration at the supervising customs office for the goods which are physically arriving and presented in another EU member state. The supervising customs office then validates the submitted data and sends the declaration data to the presentation customs office in the other EU member state, where this data will also be validated according to national data requirements. For instance, national excise duties or prohibitions and restrictions for import. Upon the validation of the supervising customs office, it registers the customs declaration. Everything is to be done electronically, of course. The customs office performs the document control after acceptance of the customs declarations and controls and pursues controls if needed and informs the presentation customs office in the other EU member state. So then the presentation customs office, this is the office where the products have arrived, for national purposes decides if they physically examine and check the shipment, if it is required, and informs back the supervising customs office about the results of their control, if applicable. So then the supervising customs office handles the amendment of the received information back of the control and amends the declaration or gives the information to the declarant that everything is accepted and everything will be okay. So then the supervising customs office confirms the payment of import duties and that the VAT at import, so the import value added tax, is levied according to the national VAT regulation. In the last step then, the supervising customs office releases the goods and sends the release notification to the company, to the importer, and to the presentation customs office in the other EU member state. Now the importer can use the goods which are in free circulation. On the next slide, you will see some benefits of the procedure. Yeah, we are already there. So a benefit definitely is a so-called single window principle. So the importer is only dealing with one central customs authority, has only one touch point with his local customs authority, with the customs office. We have a faster customs clearance for all of the imports. We will have fewer customs procedures because when a product is shipped physically from Germany in Hamburg, arriving in Hamburg, and then it has to be sent with a T1 transit procedure, for instance, to Hungary or to Austria. This is not no longer relevant because we can have a direct shipment to Hungary or Austria, whereas the import customs clearance is lodged in Germany. So this is a less or customs procedures required. We will therefore have less administrative effort on both sides, on the customs authorities side and also on the importer side. It gains more transparency and better compliance through a centralized processing. So you have the full control of every data and declaration, which is submitted to the customs authorities. And you can centrally first check the correctness of the data and do some amendments if required. And in the supply chain, we will see more flexibility, so an increased flexibility to react on your business partners' needs. Because when they would need raw materials or production materials very fast for the production in another EU member state, you can arrange a direct shipment by air freight, for instance, directly to the member state, but lodge the import declaration centrally in Germany. So what is the precondition for using the centralized clearance at import procedure? Of course, you need an authorization for that. As everything in customs, in the area of customs, you need to hold an official authorization. This must be requested at the location where your main records or main accounts are held, and where at least a part of the import activities is performed. So, what are more prerequisites for the applicant or the importer? Of course, he has to be established in the European Union. So a third mother company in Japan can't apply for the centralized customs clearance in the EU. It can only be your EU resident daughter company. So the company, in addition, has to comply with the conditions of the CCI centralized clearance at import authorizations. This will be laid down by the local by the EU provisions and have to be aligned upfront with the customs authorities. Of course, you have to have in place an accurate and verifiable accounting system, and the importer has to hold an AEO simplification authorization. The AEO is the authorized economic operator, and the applicant for the centralized clearance procedure needs to have an AEO authorization in place. So once the application is submitted, a so-called consultation process or the consultation procedure between the involved customs authorities start, where the requesting authority country lays down the details of the procedure in scope of the requirements concerning the authorizations. So there is one negative aspect to be mentioned, frankly speaking, and this is the VAT treatment, so value-added tax. VAT law is the national law. It's not covered by the EU customs regulations. So in VAT perspective, the EU provides only the framework of the law, but the individual member states have to define it, the details according to their national law. So there is a difference in the VAT handling at the centralized customs clearance at import. And the alignment between the EU member states in that regard, they may take some time, but we have clients which are already using the centralized customs clearance at import. So it is possible to find a good solution with the involved customs authorities. Asagi will give another summary in Japanese language.
Thank you, Marcos. さて、これまでの箇所についても簡単に日本語で説明させていただきます。CCI、centralized clearance for import、つまり一元化された通関手続きは、欧州の関税規則におけるプロセスの簡素化を指しており、2027年7月以降、段階的に EU 加盟国において導入されています。一元化された通関手続きは一体どのようなものなのでしょうか。まず、ステップ1。事業者は他の加盟国の税関で提示された商品について、管轄の税関に申告します。ステップ2、管轄の税関は共通のデータを検証し、申告データを他の加盟国のものが提示された税関に送信して、その国におけるデータ要件を検証します。ステップ3、検証が終わると、管轄の税関は申告書を登録し、書類検査を実施。検査が必要な場合は、物が提示された税関にその旨を通知します。ステップ4、物の提示がされた他国の税関は、物理的な検査が必要かどうかを判断し、管轄の税関に検査結果を通知します。ステップ5、管轄の税関は必要に応じて申告書の修正または無効化を処理します。ステップ6、管轄の税関は関税の支払いが確保され、VAT が国の VAT 規則に従って課税されていることを確認します。ステップ7、物のリリース、通関に関する決定がなされると、管轄の税関は事業者と物の提示がされた税関にリリース通知を送信します。この一元化された通関手続きによって、第三国のものが他の加盟国を の税関で提示されている場合であったとしても、輸入税関申告を一つの加盟国で一元的に提出することが可能となります。例えば、スペイン、イタリア、フランスに物が到着し、その国の税関において提示されている場合であっても、ドイツの税関で申告を行うことが可能となります。これには多くの利点があります。より迅速に通関手続きができること、トランジット手続きが不要となり、簡素化することができること、管理作業の軽減、一元化された処理による透明性とコンプライアンスの向上、他の加盟国のビジネスパートナーに物を提供する際の柔軟性の向上です。しかしながら、欠点もあります。物が物理的に税関に提示されている EU 加盟国において、輸入 VAT が課されること、EU 加盟国間での管理は電子的に自動で行われるわけではなく、個別のやり取りが必要となってくることなどです。Now, I will again hand over to Marcus for the last session.
Thank you, Asagi. So the last section is about the upcoming and ongoing EU customs reform. And on the introducing slide now, you will obviously directly see why it is important to have an EU customs reform. On the left-hand side, you see the growing tasks of the customs authorities, which increased over the last couple of years. I already mentioned that upon importation, more than 370 regulatory requirements must be observed during the importation of a product. So the number of the regulation increased, and it's not all about customs. As I said already, it's more about product safety and consumer protections, which are to be strengthened from an EU perspective. And environmental aspects, sustainability, as already said, like EUDR, CBAM, or CSDDD are also gaining importance. So the number of tasks increases, but the authorities themselves, the procedures they have available for obeying or for checking all of the regulations, if the regulations are fulfilled, they did not change in the past. In parallel, you see on the right-hand side a tremendous increase of the number of import declarations, especially since the COVID crisis. So we see both here an increase of the tasks of the customs authorities and an increased number of import declarations and import consignments and shipments which have to be checked. So this is squeezing the customs authorities in their position, as they are here right in the middle. So the EU has recognized that there is no central monitoring of the supply chain at an EU level, and there is no complete overview and control over which goods enter or leave the common market in the European Union. As a result, we have to say there are some trading platforms like Temu, Shein, Alibaba, and others, which are flooding the EU with their shipments below the threshold of 150 euros. And therefore, because of the sheer number of imports, the customs authorities can't perform the checks which would be necessary in order to find out if the stated customs value below 150 euro is correct or not. It is estimated by the EU Commission that about between 60 and 70% of these shipments are deliberately undervalued. So the EU has recognized that they have to do something and that challenges can't be met with the existing regulations and the existing setup. And therefore, they initiated the EU customs reform or the Union Customs Code reform in 2023. So what are the targets of this EU customs reform? On the next slide, you will see the different components and what is how this should be done. So in the middle, there is the EU risk analysis, and therefore we need an EU customs data hub where all of the required data is gathered and made available to the customs authority to perform checks. So the national customs authorities, or the integral or the central component of the EU customs reform, is the creation of an European-wide customs authority, which you can see here on top of the triangle. So the European Customs Authority pools the expertise and the knowledge of all 27 EU member states in one central function. So the EU Customs Authority will establish and maintain and be the owner of the EU customs database, which is here seen in the middle of the triangle. This will be crucial for all further import declarations and import transactions in future. A central risk management system is intended to ensure an equal treatment of all of the importers in the EU. You have to bear in mind that it might be possible that there are differences nowadays when you physically lodge an import declaration in Germany in comparison to an import declaration in Lithuania or in Italy or in Romania. So in each of the member states, you will have a different handling of the import procedure and the import declaration. And the EU, with the centralized EU Customs Authority, wants to reach or aims at the same customs handling will be applied for all of the importers. So we will have a level playing field for all of the importers. The role, as a consequence, also, the EU will introduce a development coming from the concept of an authorized economic operator, the AEO, which we have mentioned in the section before. The AEO is required for using the simplifications like the centralized clearance at import. And this role and this concept of the AEO is now developed further and becomes a so-called trust and check trader program. And this trust and check trader will benefit from much more simplifications granted by the EU Customs Authority. So the EU Customs Authority, as said, will establish the EU Customs Data Hub. And this Customs Data Hub or database is expected to integrate and replace all of the existing national IT infrastructures prevailing in all of the 27 EU member states. So over time, this will replace, we will only have one centralized IT system, which will in parallel improve the processing of the import declarations. So by having that aspects in mind, at least in theory, this will enable the EU and the member states to save billions of euros per annum in IT development and in operational costs, because instead of 27 individual solutions, we have only one solution, which has to be maintained centrally. So on the next slide, the goals of the EU reform are summarized. Asagi, can you jump? Yes, thank you. So acting as one, this single window principle, as we have seen in this centralized clearance for import. Now the EU customs authority will act as one at the external borders. So at the left-hand side, you can see the different aspects of the customs union, and an efficient customs union, and geopolitical customs union, and an agile and future-proof customs union as the goals of the EU reform. This is the establishment of the customs authority, the introduction of the customs data platform, the simplification and reduction of administrative burden, the €150 threshold for small consignments will be abolished, so that we will have for all of the shipments, regardless of the value, to lodge an import declaration and to calculate and pay import duties. A further goal of the EU customs reform is the harmonization and modernization of the customs procedures, and an improvement of risk management and crisis response, as this is all directed from the centralized, from the EU customs authority. And we will see a strengthened cooperation and information exchange between the EU customs authority and its individual EU member state customs authorities. On the next slide, I will tell you a bit more about the foreseen EU customs data hub and the timeline. And the timeline is very ambitious from an EU perspective, as you can see here. And the dates are most likely subject to change. So 2023, the legal process has been initiated by the EU Commission, and since last year until 2026, the legal framework with the EU delegated, or with the UCC delegated act and the implementing acts will be discussed and go through the legislation process. As from 2028 onwards, the EU Customs Authority becomes then an operational, starts to introduce the EU Customs Data Hub, checks regulations for the e-commerce, and abolishes the €150 threshold for smaller consignments. As from 2032, the Cut, Trust and Check Trader program will come into play, and this will then, the EU Customs Data Hub will become mandatory for the trust and check traders. And as from 2038 onwards, the EU Customs Data Hub will be obligatory to be used for all imports and for all importers which are acting in the European Union. So what is the EU Customs Data Hub, and what are the key areas and the key aspects? It's a common EU-wide basis for risk analysis based on the centralized data. And it forms then the basis, of course, for the control mechanisms and control recommendations from the customs authority to the individual member states. The EU Customs Data Hub will contribute to a more efficient and more effective protection of the EU external border for goods. It replaces, or now it connects the 27 national IT system on an EU level, which is slow, and therefore it will replace in the long run, the EU Customs Data Hub will replace the national customs IT systems. And the requirements for the data that must be submitted to the future EU Customs Data Hub include transport, storage-related data, for instance, the location where the goods actually are stored. A transport ID would become necessary. You have to submit goods-related data such as product description, weights, the country of origin, the customs tariff numbers. You have to include supplier data, so who is the seller, who is the producer of the product, where are they located, as well as other data requested by the customs authorities. In other words, simply you have to submit every available data element about the import consignment to the EU Customs Authority. So what can companies already do now? How can you prepare yourself to face the challenges? So we have here 4 elements. They are only examples. What can be done? First of all, review and maintain. So review your import transactions and assess if they can be correct or if they are correct. You have to invest, so make money available for your IT system and also for the education, which is the third pillar here. Educate your personnel, your people dealing with trade and customs activities, that they are on the right knowledge level, which is required to fulfill the future obligations. And you have to cooperate and collaborate with your business partners along the supply chain. And on the next slide, we will give some examples how this can be done. What can be done to face the challenges in future? You see here 5 different topics we have pointed out. Customs data analytics, all of them are IT related. So you have to utilize IT. Manually can't be done much things. So the potential areas also for application of artificial intelligence, this customs data analytics to create transparency on the flow of goods, on the customs tariff numbers, on the completeness of the data, of the foreign trade related data, to identify inconsistencies in your IT material master data and to improve the data quality of the master data through standardization, data checks, regular data checks, and also enrichment of data, which is then included in controlled approval workflows and in your company, and deletes and detects duplicates or doublets in your material master data. You should utilize partnership ecosystems with your suppliers and customers to share very early in the process transport related data. For instance, you can create a trade radar dashboards, another thing to create transparency in your supply chain, to get an overview of the flow of goods and also what is the amount of import duties you are currently paying. On the left-hand side below, you see what we call a technology-infused classification. So to determine the customs tariff number for the determination of HS codes in the customs tariff number, there are already some solutions available on the market, which are proven and really quite good. And you could already now take into consideration to use the technology-infused classification tools for your material master data. And the last piece, the data extraction. This is to get rid of manual work at import and to not longer to manually key in trade-related data into the import declaration, but to extract electronically from submitted commercial documents some data elements which are required for the import customs clearance from the commercial invoice, from the delivery note, from the airway bill, seaway bill, CMR document, whatsoever. So use data extraction solutions to minimize the manual handling of the import transactions. Just to give you an idea of potential areas where IT or artificial intelligence can be applied. Asagi, time for you to summarize what has been said.
Thank you, Marcos. 370以上のルールがあるにもかかわらず、統一されたモニタリングシステムというものは EU には存在しません。例えば、150ユーロ未満の免税額というものがオンラインマーケットプラットフォームで多用もしくは悪用されるケースも増えており、税関の負担が急増しています。EU は既存のルールではグローバルトレードに関する問題を解決することができないことを認識しており、そのため2023年に関税制度改革が提案されました。目標は EU の外部国境でアクティングアズワン、つまり一丸となった行動をとる、より強力で簡素化された関税システムを構築することです。EU 関税制度改革の核となるのは EU 関税当局を設立することです。新たに設立される EU 関税当局は、EU 税関当局が新システムで重要な役割を担う EU 税関データベースを設立し維持することとなります。また、EU 域内におけるすべての輸入事業者が平等な扱いを受けることを保証することを目的とするリスク管理システムが導入されます。ビジネスプロセスとサプライチェーンが完全に透明である場合、トラスト&チェックトレーダー、つまり信頼性の高い貿易事業者は、税関が積極的に介入することなく、EU 内で商品を流通させることができるようになります。トラスト&チェックカテゴリーは、信頼性のある貿易事業者を対象とした現行の認可事業者、オーソライズドエコノミックオペレーター、AEO 制度をさらに強化することを目的としています。また、関税免除額の150ユーロの廃止も制度改革のゴールの一つです。新しい EU 関税データベースは既存の税関 IT インフラストラクチャーを統合して置き換え、関連分野のシステムも改善することが期待されています。これは EU とその加盟国において IT 開発と運用コストの削減につながります。これらの新しい EU の関税制度は企業にとっても大きな変化をもたらすこととなります。企業は今後の変化を念頭に置いた上で、物流に関するデータを集め、現在のコンプライアンスの仕組みやプランを全体的に見直す必要があります。その上で、例えば在庫管理や運輸、会計に関するシステムといった必要な IT インフラへの投資を検討することが推奨されます。また、社内でのトレーニングや法律、制度のアップデートに関するモニタリングを行うことも重要となってきます。これらに積極的に取り組むことで、企業はコンプライアンスを維持すると同時に、新しい関税制度の導入により提供されるメリットを享受することができるでしょう。日本語のまとめは以上となります。Now we have reached to the end of our webcast. I see there is no question raised in the chat, but if you have any question afterwards, we are happy to answer you through emails or call us. Our webcast have been recorded and we will send you the link to our video as well as the presentation slide after the webcast. We are also happy to hear your feedback to our webcast or request on further topics. Thank you very much for your participation, and we look forward to welcoming you to our next webcast. We wish you a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.